Welcome back to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into the deeply unsettling case of Flat 4B. This is the true story of four young college grads, Paranjakta, Rohan, Ayan, and Arpita, who thought they'd just scored the ultimate dream apartment in West Bengal. But as we're about to see, that dream rapidly unraveled into an absolute paranormal nightmare. So let's just jump right in and break down exactly how this haunting took hold. Okay, so picture this. The group is finalizing their paperwork with the building secretary, right? And out of nowhere, they get this incredibly bizarre, super specific instruction. The secretary tells them, come rain, storm, or anything, you guys won't close the upper gate. Now, they were moving into the 5th floor, which meant they had to pass through this specific gate to access the open terrace. The secretary actually repeats this rule 3 or 4 times. And when the group goes up to check it out, they find a literal brick wedged under the door to act as a permanent stopper. It's one of those immediate, jarring red flags that's cleverly disguised as just some quirky building rule. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would they ignore a red flag like that? Well, context is everything. We've all been desperate for a good deal, haven't we? When you're a young adult just starting out, you tend to overlook a lot of weirdness for cheap rent. They had just snagged this massive 2 BHK flat near the Kolkata airport for only 8,000 rupees a month. If you know anything about renting, you know that is absurdly cheap for a huge place where the rooftop literally overlooks the glowing airport runway. Plus, Rohan and Ayan had been dealing with some pretty relentless harassment from their previous landlords just for having their girlfriends visit. So when a broker showed them this beautiful, spacious top-floor unit with an open sky view for a fraction of the standard price, they were completely mesmerized. The sheer relief literally blinded them to the reality of what they were actually walking into. But of course, there was a catch. The landlord demanded a staggering 11-month security deposit up front. I mean, normally you'd see, a 2-month deposit? But 11 months? That is a massive financial commitment. This wasn't just a standard lease agreement, it was a financial trap. It created this colossal sunk cost fallacy for the group. Basically, no matter how bad things were about to get inside that flat, these young adults simply couldn't afford to just walk away from that much money. They were totally locked in. And, the red flags just kept piling up. During their first tour of the flat, they stumbled upon some deeply unsettling things. There was this strange circular mark right on the living room floor, covered in spots of melted candle wax. Then, out on Ayan's small balcony, they found a tub with a dried-up tulsi plant that was eerily wrapped in bangles and red cloth, sitting right next to this bizarre winch with old buckets hanging from it. But honestly, the most glaring oddity? The broker casually drops that the entire 4th and 5th floors were completely abandoned. Yeah, everyone else in the building lived on the 3rd floor or lower. Parajakta, who is actually pretty sensitive to energies, immediately felt a heavy negative presence, but that cheap rent kept her quiet. Once they actually moved in, things shifted in a horrific way. At first, it really did seem idyllic, strong sisterly bonds, sipping evening tea on the terrace, watching the flights take off. But that didn't last. The atmosphere quickly soured into this overwhelming heavy negativity. The couple started fighting constantly. Parajakta, who was studying for competitive exams at the time, suddenly started failing all her interviews out of nowhere. And Arpita, she spiraled into severe depression. The entity they were dealing with wasn't just lurking in the corners. It was actively corrupting their psychological well-being. It was tearing their everyday reality apart. This psychological warfare pretty quickly escalated into inexplicable physical anomalies. Like, picture this. One evening, Parajakta is cooking dinner and Rohan is hanging out nearby. All of a sudden, she clearly hears the very distinct sound of a waiting dial tone. That automated voice saying the person you're trying to reach is on another call. It's coming right from Rohan's cell phone. So she asks him who he's calling. He says he's not calling anyone. Parajakta walks over to check the phone herself, and the device is completely locked. The screen is pitch black. So, whose phone was that? And where on earth was that sound coming from? Which brings us to a really terrifying realization. Remember, no one else lived on the 4th or 5th floor. Parajakta tried to rationalize that dial tone, just like Arpita had earlier tried to rationalize seeing someone running down the hall as, a stray cat. But they couldn't ignore the layout of the building anymore. They were entirely isolated at the top of this complex. There were absolutely no neighbors next door or right below them to accidentally make these noises. Every single footstep, every dial tone, every bang, It all had to be coming from inside their own isolated space. And the haunting escalated incredibly fast from there. Around 1 a.m. one night, Rohan wakes up literally growling, suffering from violent sleep paralysis and feeling this massive, heavy weight choking him. Then, during a totally normal afternoon, he's suddenly struck by this massive fever. His neck twists awkwardly, his teeth clench shut, and he just drops into sudden unconsciousness. By evening, the group is coming home to find appliances that were definitively unplugged, like induction cookers and the TV, just turned on by themselves. And late at night, Rohan and Parajakta are in bed and they hear the distinct, loud sound of a huge plastic sheet violently flapping in the hallway, moving straight toward their room right before their sliding door completely opens on its own. The entity was getting aggressive, and it was moving directly into their physical space. Then came the daytime attacks. Parajakta was standing out on the balcony one afternoon, just brushing her hair. She gathers up the loose strands, curls them into a little bun, and tosses it over the edge. But instead of falling down to the street, the hair bun is actively pushed upwards. It literally floats up into the air. Completely shocked, she tries to run back inside, but she finds herself totally paralyzed, grabbed tightly by some unseen physical force. She couldn't even force a scream out of her throat. It wasn't until Ayan finally heard her gasping and ran out to the balcony that the hairbun dropped and the paralysis finally broke. All these terrifying puzzle pieces finally fell into place when Rohan's mother came for a visit. She happened to bump into a woman down on the third floor who revealed she was actually the previous tenant of flat 4B. And guys, the parallels were undeniable. The previous tenant experienced phantom doorbells at 3:30 a.m., which she claimed led to her husband becoming violently abusive and alcoholic. And those melted wax circles Rohan found on move-in day? Turns out those were from desperate, failed pujas the couple performed trying to stop the entity. Just like our group, they were trapped by that massive security deposit, eventually having to literally beg the building secretary for a transfer to the lower floors just to escape. It proved, without a doubt, that our group had walked blindly into a pre-existing paranormal trap. Now, if there was any lingering doubt left, it completely vanished during a family visit. Rohan's younger brother and cousin were sitting on the bedroom floor, looking out into the hallway in broad daylight while the adults were chatting nearby. Suddenly, Rohan's brother just freezes. The color completely drains from his face. Later that night, he finally confessed what he saw. He said, "We saw a man walking on his hands and feet. He had long hair that covered his face." So the entity was no longer just a shadow or a strange sound, it was physically manifesting in broad daylight, literally crawling through their hallway. At this point, the flatmates were in full panic mode. Ayan took charge and frantically started contacting multiple pundits and tantrics, practically begging for solutions. He followed all their instructions to the letter. He burned camphor and rotated it clockwise and counterclockwise through every room. He placed bowls of water outside the flat doors to ward off the negative energy. It was this desperate, frantic attempt to use everyday spiritual tools to fight back against a heavily entrenched, violent presence. But absolutely none of it worked. By this point, the group was completely fracturing. Rohan and Prajakta temporarily moved out, while Ayan and Arpita went through a really vicious abusive breakup. One day, a severely depressed Arpita went up to the open terrace just to cry. As she's sitting there weeping, she realizes someone has come and sat down right next to her. She looks over, and it's a shadowy male figure with long hair. Too terrified to even turn her head fully, she just sat there and listened as the entity spoke directly to her. It said, "This is what happens in love, isn't it? When you truly love someone, you have to give up your life." And then a cold breeze blew, and he was just gone. This thing was actively preying on her emotional devastation. Things were now accelerating toward a terrifying climax. Arpita's friend Misty came to stay with her for some comfort, but almost immediately, Misty became morbidly obsessed with the terrace. She kept going up there to talk to the entity. Then, one evening, it fully took hold of her. And guys, this is pure nightmare fuel. While sitting with her friends, Misty suddenly demands tea in this unrecognized, incredibly deep voice. When someone actually hands her boiling hot tea, she drinks it in a single gulp without even burning her mouth. She then calmly starts combing Arpita's hair to match the exact style of the long-haired shadow figure. Later that night, Misty disappeared, and they found her sprinting to the absolute edge of the open roof, ready to jump. When they finally dragged her back downstairs, she violently spat on the protective Om symbol painted right outside their door. It took Ayan and Arpita's friends physically dragging a violently thrashing Misty to a shrine near the airport to finally end this. The priest there took one single look at her and delivered a brutal ultimatum. Vacate the house immediately, or one of you will die. He commanded that Misty must never ever be brought near that flat again. That was the absolute breaking point. The group realized that the 11-month security deposit didn't matter anymore. Their actual lives were on the line. They abandoned the deposit, packed whatever they could grab, and fled Flat 4B for good. Thankfully, Parajakta and Rohan did eventually marry and find peace, but they never got any real closure on the apartment itself, which leaves us with one incredibly terrifying question. What truly happened in Flat 4B, and whose spirit still waits on that open terrace? Why was a literal brick permanently wedged into the door leading to the roof? We may never know the true origins of the long-haired man who crawled through those halls, but the documented experiences of these four friends serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes a deal that seems way too good to be true is actually a deadly trap. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this breakdown helped you grasp just how terrifying this situation really was. Keep learning, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.